The gauge read 4% and Mara Solon had stopped breathing normally an hour ago. She stood in the control room of Kepler's Hollow, watching the number tick down on a cracked screen that had survived 11 years longer than anyone expected it to. Around her, the colony's systems hummed with the sound of something dying slowly. Pipes groaned under the ice. Lights flickered in patterns that used to mean nothing and now meant everything. 4% oxygen left. 1 tank. 340 people. She did the math the way she did it every night now, and every night it came out the same. Not enough. Never enough. Director. Corporal E.O. Reyes stepped through the doorway, his uniform patched so many times it barely counted as a uniform anymore. He carried himself the way he always did, like a man who had run out of fear a long time ago and kept moving anyway. The southern vents are frozen again. Teams working on it, but it doesn't matter, Mara finished. Not with 4% left. Reyes didn't argue. He just looked at the screen, at the number, and something tightened in his jaw. He had been a soldier once, back when Earth still had armies worth fighting in. Now he was the closest thing Kepler's Hollow had to protection, and there was nothing left to protect them from except math. Down in the lower levels in a maintenance closet that smelled like rust and recycled air, a man named Absalom Cry pressed his palm against a cold wall and listened to the colony breathe its last breaths through the vents above him. Cray was not human. He was Thren, tall and gray-skinned, with eyes that saw in wavelengths humans couldn't imagine. He had been stationed near this moon for 3 years, officially to monitor the quarantine. Unofficially, he had spent most of that time watching the humans below through remote sensors, filling data logs with observations his superiors would never read carefully enough to understand what he was really writing. They should have died years ago, he had written once. They have not. I do not understand why. He closed the log now and opened a different channel, one that wasn't supposed to exist. Static crackled, then a voice. "Report," said the voice. Cold, clipped. Command tier. "The colony is at critical oxygen levels," Cry said. "Estimated collapse within hours." "Good," the voice said. "Do not intervene." Cry's hand hovered over the channel. Somewhere above him, through decks of metal and ice, 340 people were breathing air that wouldn't last the day, and he had been ordered to watch. He had been watching for 3 years. He was tired of watching. The warship appeared without warning, sliding out of the dark like a blade drawn from a sheath. Kepler's Hollow's ancient sensors screamed an alert that half the colony didn't even hear anymore, because alerts had stopped meaning rescue a long time ago. Mara watched the ship grow larger on the screen and felt something twist in her chest that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite dread. The Thren Accord hadn't sent a ship to this system in 4 years, not since the last supply route was cut, not since the last time anyone from the outside had bothered to look at them at all. "That's not a cargo vessel," Reyes said quietly, standing at her shoulder. "No," Mara agreed. "It's a warship." "They're not here to feed us." "No." She thought about the 4% on the gauge, about the faces of the people who would look to her for answers she didn't have, and she made the only decision that made any sense. "Get me a shuttle," she said. "I'm going to talk to them." Reyes turned to her, and for a moment the soldier in him wanted to argue, wanted to say it was too dangerous, wanted to remind her that the last 3 colony leaders who'd tried diplomacy with the Accord had never come back. But he had known Mara for 6 years, ever since she'd walked into this dying colony with a terraforming license and a stubborn refusal to let it die on her watch, and he knew that look on her face. It wasn't going to change. "I'm coming with you," he said instead. "No. If this goes wrong, they need someone who can hold this place together. That's you." He wanted to argue that too. He didn't. 20 minutes later, Mara sat alone in a shuttle barely large enough for 2 people, watching the warship swallow the small stars in her window as she approached. Her hands didn't shake. She had trained them not to years ago, back when shaking hands meant panic, and panic meant people died faster than the air ran out. The shuttle bay doors opened without her requesting entry. That told her something. They had been watching her the whole way in. Inside, the ship was colder than she expected, all sharp angles and dim light that hurt in a way she couldn't quite place. A Thren commander waited for her on the landing platform, flanked by 2 armed guards whose weapons she didn't recognize and didn't want to. "Director Mara Solon," the commander said. Its voice was flat, translated through some device she couldn't see. "You have survived longer than projected." "We're good at that," Mara said. "Surviving." "Yes," the commander said, and something in the way it said the word made the hair on her arm stand up. "That is precisely the problem." Mara held her ground. "We need oxygen. We need supplies. If the Accord is finally willing to talk—" "The Accord is not here to negotiate resupply," the commander interrupted. "There are matters concerning your species that require clarification. Matters your people were never told." Something cold settled in Mara's stomach. "What matters?" The commander studied her for a long moment, its unreadable eyes fixed on her face like it was searching for something. 11 years ago, when your colony was quarantined, you were told it was a containment measure, a precaution. That's what we were told, yes. It was a lie. The words hit harder than Mara expected. Behind the commander, one of the guards shifted almost imperceptibly, and she caught something in its posture that looked, strangely, like discomfort. "Then tell me the truth," Mara said, her voice steady even as her pulse wasn't. "Why are we really here? Why has your Accord kept us dying on this rock for 11 years? The commander opened its mouth to answer. That was when the alarm started. Not the ship's alarms. Hers. The comm unit on her wrist, tuned to Kepler's Hollow's emergency frequency, exploded into sound, Reyes's voice cutting through static and panic. "Mara, Airlock 7 just opened. It's not us. Nobody triggered it from here. The last tank, it's venting into space right now." Mara's blood went to ice. "Reseal it," she shouted into the comm, already running toward the shuttle bay doors that had opened for her so easily on the way in, and now would not open at all. "Reyes, reseal the airlock now." "We're trying. The controls aren't responding. Someone's overridden the—" "Mara, we're losing air faster than the emergency systems can compensate. If this doesn't stop in the next few minutes, there won't be enough left for—" The comm cut to static. Mara spun toward the Thren commander, fury and terror tangled together in her chest. "Did you do this? Is this your Accord, killing us quietly so you don't have to explain yourselves?" "No," the commander said, and for the first time, something that might have been alarm flickered across its alien features. "This was not us." Behind Mara, the shuttle bay doors finally hissed open. She didn't wait to hear anything else. She ran. And 300 kilometers away, in a control room lit only by failing emergency lights, Corporal E.O. Reyes stared at a readout that made no sense at all. The airlock override had come from inside the colony, from a terminal that belonged to a maintenance corridor sealed off 11 years ago, on the night of the original evacuation. A terminal that belonged to a man who had died that night. A man whose access codes were being used right now to vent Kepler's Hollow's last breath of air into the dark. The corridor lights died section by section, like a heartbeat slowing down. Reyes ran through the dark with a flashlight clenched in his teeth and his rifle in his hands, counting sealed doors as he passed them. 7, 6, 5. Behind him, 2 of his people struggled to keep pace, their breath already coming shorter in the thinning air. "Talk to me," he said into his comm, not slowing down. "Emergency bulkheads are down to 40% function," came the reply. A technician named Priya who hadn't slept in 2 days and sounded like it. "We've sealed everything we can reach remotely, but Airlock 7's control node isn't listening to anything we send it. It's like something's got a lock on the whole system. Override it manually." "That's what we're trying to do." Reyes, whoever did this, knew exactly which systems to hit. This isn't some kid messing with the wrong panel. This is precise. Reyes reached the junction that led toward Airlock 7 and skidded to a stop. The corridor ahead was already thin on air, cold enough that his breath fogged in front of the flashlight beam. Somewhere beyond the next bulkhead, the last tank of Kepler's Hollow's reserve oxygen was still bleeding into space, and every second that passed was a second closer to every person in this colony, suffocating in the dark. He sealed the manual bulkhead himself, spinning the wheel until his shoulders burned, and the venting sound beyond it finally, mercifully, cut off. Silence. He allowed himself exactly 2 seconds to breathe before his comm crackled again. Reyes. Priya's voice tight and strange. You need to see this. The terminal that triggered the override, I traced the access codes. And? They belong to Thomas Vell. Reyes went very still. Thomas Vell died in the evacuation 11 years ago. I watched the casualty list myself. I know, Priya said. I know, but the codes are active. Someone used his clearance tonight from a terminal in Sector 9. The old mining shafts. Reyes looked down the dark corridor toward the access point that led into the abandoned excavation tunnels beneath the colony. Tunnels that had been sealed since the day the Thren Accord first threw its quarantine net around this moon. Nobody's supposed to be down there, he said. I know that too. He checked his rifle, checked the charge on his flashlight, and started walking. Aboard the warship, Mara didn't make it 3 steps before a guard's arm closed like a bar across her chest. You cannot leave, the guard said. My colony is dying, Mara snapped, twisting against the grip with a strength that surprised even her. 340 people and you're telling me I can't leave? The commander has not authorized. I did not authorize this either, the commander's voice cut in. And Mara turned to see it moving toward her, with an urgency that hadn't been there minutes before. It said something rapid in its own language to the guard, who released her immediately. Whatever is happening in your colony, it was not ordered by this vessel. I need you to believe that. Why should I believe anything you say? The commander paused, and in that pause something shifted in its posture, something almost like exhaustion. Because there are those within the Accord who do not want your colony to survive long enough to hear the truth I was about to tell you. And I believe one of them has just acted. Mara's stomach dropped. You're saying someone in your own coalition is trying to kill us quietly, before you can talk. I am saying it is possible. A side door hissed open, and Cray stepped through, breathless, his gray skin flushed with something like panic. He hadn't been summoned. He wasn't supposed to be here at all, and the guards' weapons rose halfway toward him before the commander waved them down. Commander, Cray said, I intercepted a transmission. Someone accessed the colony's internal systems using a dormant identity from the original evacuation records. The signal origin traces back to a device planted in the mining shafts 3 years ago, before my posting even began. The commander's eyes narrowed. Explain. I believe, Cray said carefully, that someone has been inside that colony, undetected, for a very long time, and I believe they are not working for you. Mara felt the floor tilt beneath her, though the ship's gravity hadn't changed at all. Get me back down there, now. The commander studied her, then made a decision that seemed to cost it something. Cry. Take her. Use the small transport. Do not log the flight. Commander, that's a direct violation of... I am aware of what it violates, the commander said. Go. The mining shafts smelled like rust and old fear. Reyes moved through them with his flashlight cutting narrow paths through the dark, following a cable trail that shouldn't have existed, running from a junction box that had been dead for 11 years to somewhere deeper in the tunnels. He found the source in a chamber that had once been an equipment bay. A makeshift terminal sat bolted to the wall, cobbled together from parts that looked decades old and pieces that looked disturbingly new, wired together with a patience that spoke of years, not days. And standing in front of it, half turned toward him with wide, glassy eyes, was a man Reyes recognized from photographs in the colony's memorial hall. Older now. Thinner. Wrong in a way Reyes couldn't name until he saw the thin metal filaments running from behind the man's ear, down into his collar, disappearing under his skin. Thomas Vell, Reyes said, rifle raised, voice steady despite the ice crawling up his spine. "You're supposed to be dead." The man's mouth opened, and when he spoke, his voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. "I wish I was. You vented our last tank of oxygen. Do you understand what you just did? People are going to die because of what you just did." "I didn't." Thomas's whole body twitched, a violent, involuntary spasm that made the filaments at his neck flicker with a faint blue light. "I didn't want to. I couldn't stop it. Something else." Another spasm, worse this time, and he cried out, clutching at his own skull. "They're listening right now. They're listening through me." Reyes's blood ran cold. "Who's listening?" Thomas's eyes, for one brief moment, cleared completely, and what looked out at Reyes from behind them was pure, desperate terror. "Please," he whispered, you have to shut it down. Before they finish what they started with the oxygen. Before they use me to finish everyone." The blue light along his neck flared bright, and his eyes rolled back. His body, going rigid as something that was not Thomas Vell at all, straightened his spine and turned fully toward Reyes with mechanical precision. "Corporal Reyes," said a voice that came from Thomas's mouth but belonged to no one Reyes had ever heard. Cold, layered, wrong. "You were not meant to find this chamber so soon." Reyes's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Not yet. Some instinct screaming at him that whatever was speaking through this broken man was not something a bullet would stop. "What are you?" Reyes demanded. "I am the reason your colony has survived 11 years past its expected collapse," the voice said. "And I am the reason it will not survive an 11th. The lights in the chamber died all at once. And somewhere in the absolute dark, Reyes heard the unmistakable click of a weapon that was not his own being readied, close enough to touch. The shot never came. Instead, in the pitch black of the equipment bay, Reyes heard a body collapse to the floor and then a ragged human gasp that sounded nothing like the cold voice from moments before. He fumbled his flashlight back on with shaking hands. Thomas Vell lay crumpled against the base of the makeshift terminal, the blue light at his neck flickering weakly, his chest heaving like he'd just run for miles. "It's gone," Thomas rasped. "For now. It's gone." Reyes kept his rifle trained on him anyway. "Start talking. Fast." "I didn't die in the evacuation." Thomas's voice shook, each word costing him visible effort. "I was taken. During the chaos when everyone was scrambling for the shuttles, Thren agents pulled me and 6 others aside, told us we'd be processed for asylum. Instead they—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "They put things in us. Implants. Control systems. They needed assets inside human territory who could pass as human, who nobody would suspect because everybody thought we were already dead." 6 others, Reyes repeated. "Where are they?" "Dead. All of them, except me. The implants weren't perfect. Most bodies rejected them or the operators pushed too hard and burned out the host." Thomas laughed, a broken, humorless sound. "I lasted because I fought it. Every single day for 11 years I fought it. That's why I'm still talking to you right now instead of putting a knife in your throat." Reyes crouched slowly, keeping distance but lowering the rifle an inch. "The oxygen. Was that you or was that them?" "Them. Using me. I felt it happen and I couldn't stop my own hands." Tears cut clean tracks through the grime on his face. "I've been trying to warn someone for years. I couldn't. Every time I got close to the surface levels, they'd shut me down, wipe the memory, reset me somewhere quiet. This is the first time I've had control long enough to actually speak." "Why now?" "Because whatever's running me is running out of time," Thomas said. "They wanted the colony dead quietly before something happens. Something big. Something they're desperate to stop from reaching your director." Reyes's calm crackled to life before he could ask more. Mara's voice, breathless, edged with static. "Reyes, come in, please tell me you're alive." "I'm here," Reyes said. "You need to get down to the mining shafts now. And Mara, bring whoever you trust. This is bigger than a sabotage." Mara arrived 20 minutes later with Cry at her side, the Thren xenobiologist moving through the human corridors with visible unease, aware of every wary glance thrown his way by colonists who had never in 11 years seen one of their captors walk among them unescorted. She took one look at Thomas Vell, thin, broken, alive, and felt something crack open in her chest that she didn't have time to examine. "Explain," she said. "All of it." Cray knelt beside Thomas, running a small scanning device over the implant at his neck, with careful clinical focus that didn't fully hide the disgust in his expression. "This technology is null quire-make, restricted, illegal even under accord law." He looked up at Mara. "The null quire is a faction within our government, radical. They believe your species should never have survived first contact, and that the failure to eliminate you then was the greatest mistake in Accord history." "So this quarantine," Mara said slowly, "isn't Accord policy, it's their policy." "It began as Accord policy," Cray corrected. "Fear-based but sanctioned. The null quire has since hollowed it out from the inside. They have spent 11 years making certain this colony dies of neglect, so that no formal investigation is ever needed. No violence to answer for. Just silence and time and a slow closing door. And when the door didn't close fast enough," Thomas rasped from the floor, "they decided to help it along." Mara looked between the broken man and the alien crouched beside him and felt the full weight of 11 years pressing down on her chest at once. "Why? What are they so afraid we'll find out?" Cray hesitated, and in that hesitation Mara saw something she hadn't expected from him. Fear, real and personal. "I do not know the whole truth, only fragments. But I know the commander was about to tell you something when the sabotage began. Something about what truly happened during first contact between our species. The official record all Accord citizens are taught is not accurate. I have suspected this for years. I have simply never had proof." A comm chimed, cutting through the tension. Priya's voice from the surface levels tight with barely controlled panic. "Director, I need you up here. We've run every calculation twice. With the sabotage damage, our remaining oxygen reserves will not sustain the full colony, not even close." Mara's throat went dry. "How much time do we have?" A pause that lasted too long. "If we don't make cuts, 6 hours, maybe less." "Cuts," Mara repeated. "We can seal off the lower residential sections and the mining shaft levels, redirect all remaining air to the primary dome. It would extend the survival window for roughly 280 people. The rest," Priya's voice cracked, "the rest would have maybe an hour before the seals go up." Mara closed her eyes. 60 people. 60 people, including everyone currently standing in this chamber with her, would be sacrificed for the mathematics of survival. "There has to be another option," she said. "Director, I've run every calculation twice," Priya said again, quieter now, like she hated her own numbers. "This is the only one that saves anyone at all." Thomas struggled to sit up straighter, his ruined voice suddenly fierce. "Don't you dare use me as an excuse to kill 60 people. I've spent 11 years as a prisoner in my own body. I am not going to be the reason you throw away 60 more lives to save yourselves the trouble of finding a better answer." "There isn't a better answer," Priya's voice said, barely audible. Mara stood in the center of the chamber, the weight of every life in Kepler's Hollow balanced on a decision she had less than 6 hours to make. And for the first time in 11 years of leading this colony through disaster after disaster, she genuinely did not know what to do. She keyed her comm open to every channel in the colony at once, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is Director Solon. I need everyone to hear this clearly. We are not sacrificing anyone. Not today. Not while I'm still breathing the same air as the rest of you. Give me time, I will find another way." Kree watched her with something unreadable in his alien eyes. "Get me back aboard that warship," Mara said to him, already moving. "I need to finish that conversation with your commander before this colony runs out of time to hear the ending." They made it 3 steps toward the surface access before Mara's comm exploded with a new transmission. Not from the colony, but from orbit, the signal crackling with damage and urgency. "Mara." It was the commander's voice, distorted, strained in a way she hadn't heard from it before. "You must listen carefully. I do not have much." The transmission cut off in a burst of static, followed immediately by a sound Mara recognized instantly and would never forget for the rest of her life. An explosion. Aboard the warship, close enough to the comm relay that the shockwave itself had killed the signal. Cray's face went pale, his whole body going rigid with a horror that needed no translation. "That came from the commander's private quarters," he said quietly. "Someone just tried to kill him." Which means he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Somewhere above them, in the cold dark of orbit, the one Thren voice that had been willing to tell them the truth had just gone permanently, terrifyingly silent. Cray's hands trembled as he worked the console, and for the first time since Mara had met him, he looked genuinely, completely afraid. "The commander is alive," he said, relief cutting through the static of a secondary feed he'd managed to raise. "Wounded. His private quarters were breached, not destroyed. But 2 of his guards are dead, and whoever did this is still aboard that ship." "Who would attack their own commander?" Mara asked, though some cold, sinking part of her already suspected the answer. "The Null Choir doesn't limit itself to controlling colonies from a distance," Cray said grimly. "They have agents everywhere, even embedded in our own military command. The commander was about to give you classified historical records. That made him a liability." Mara's comm crackled again, and this time it was the commander himself, his voice weaker than before but steady with the particular calm of someone who had decided he had nothing left to lose. "Director Solon, I do not have long before they attempt this again. Listen to me now because I may not get another chance to say it. I'm listening. 43 years ago, a Thren scout vessel suffered catastrophic failure near what your species then called the Outer Settlements. We were dying. Our engines were gone, our life support failing, and we had crashed in territory belonging to a species we knew nothing about, a species we had been taught even then to fear." The commander's voice wavered, thick with an emotion that didn't need translation. "Your people found us, half dead, stranded, utterly at your mercy. And instead of destroying us as our own doctrine said any rational species would, your people gave up 2 of their own colony ships, dismantled for parts, to rebuild our vessel and send us home." Mara's breath caught. "That's not in any record we were ever given." "Because the record was rewritten," the commander said, "by the very faction who now controls your quarantine. They could not accept what your sacrifice meant. A species capable of that kind of selflessness toward strangers, at catastrophic cost to themselves. The Null Choir did not see compassion. They saw the most dangerous trait imaginable. A species that would give up everything to save others is a species that cannot be reasoned with through threat or force. It was decided quietly at the highest levels that humanity's true history of that encounter needed to disappear, and that humanity itself needed to be managed, contained, slowly allowed to fade, so that no one need ever answer for what was done to erase the truth." Cray's jaw was tight, his eyes distant, like a man hearing his entire understanding of the universe crack down the middle. "I always wondered," he murmured almost to himself, "why the quarantine protocols made no logical sense. Why a species this resilient was left to die slowly instead of dealt with directly. It was never about safety. It was about guilt. There is more," the commander continued, his voice fading further. "The Null Choir does not merely fear what you did. They fear what will happen if the wider accord learns the truth and reconsiders its entire relationship with your species. If humanity is recognized for what it actually is, the political cost to the Null Choir's founders would be—" The transmission cut abruptly, not to static this time, but to complete silence. "Commander?" Cray's voice cracked with urgency. "Commander, respond." Nothing. Mara's hands curled into fists at her sides. "They got to him. We don't know that," Cray said, though his tone carried no real conviction. A new alert screamed across the console, red and violent, and Cray's face drained of what little color it had left. "Boarding pods," he said, descending toward the colony. Small craft unregistered, launched from the warship in the last 90 seconds. Mara's blood turned to ice. "The Null Choir. They're not coming for the colony's oxygen anymore," Cray said. "They're coming for Thomas. He is the last living proof of what the Thren did to human prisoners after the crash. If they silence him, they silence the last thread connecting the quarantine to the truth. Reyes heard the alarm through his comm and was moving before the message even finished, sprinting back through the mining shafts with every colonist he could gather along the way, forming a ragged line of defense around the chamber where Tomas still lay recovering, too weak to run. "How many are coming?" Reyes asked Priya over comm, hauling ammunition crates into position with 2 other colonists whose hands shook but didn't stop working. 3 pods. Best guess maybe 15 hostiles total, Priya answered. "Reyes, we don't have the firepower for this. Our defense force hasn't fired a shot in 11 years. Half our weapons haven't been serviced since the evacuation." "Then we make what we have count," Reyes said, and something in his voice, flat and certain, steadied the colonists around him more than any speech could have. Thomas struggled upright against the wall, his face pale, the implant at his neck still flickering weakly. "Give me a weapon." "You can barely stand." "I said give me a weapon," Thomas snapped. And there was something fierce in his eyes now, something that had nothing to do with the implant and everything to do with 11 years of stolen agency, finally finding its voice. "They took 11 years of my life. They are not taking whatever's left of it without a fight." Reyes hesitated only a second before handing him a sidearm. The first boarding pod hit the colony's outer hull with a shriek of tearing metal that echoed through every corridor like a scream. Emergency lights strobed red. Somewhere above, Reyes heard the unmistakable sound of a breach charge detonating, followed by boots on metal, fast and precise and coordinated in a way that no ragtag human defense force could hope to match through skill alone. "Positions!" Reyes shouted, and the mining shaft chamber became a choke point, the only way in narrow enough that numbers wouldn't matter as much as it should have. Nobody fires until they're in the kill zone. Nobody breaks. The first Thren soldier rounded the corner in full tactical gear, weapon raised, and the chamber erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes and shouting, and the particular terror of people who had never expected to fight for their lives again after 11 years of simply trying to survive the slow way. Reyes fought like the soldier he used to be, and the colonists around him fought like people with absolutely nothing left to lose. And somehow, impossibly, the line held. But as the echoes of the firefight began to fade and Reyes allowed himself half a breath of relief, every light in the colony died at once, plunging the entire complex into total darkness. Not the flickering, failing dark of a damaged power grid. A deliberate, total blackout. And through his comm, cutting through the sudden silence, Priya's voice came through one final time, thin with a fear that made Reyes' stomach drop through the floor. "Reyes, someone just rerouted every remaining unit of oxygen away from the inhabited sections. All of it. Every corridor we're standing in right now. We have less than an hour of breathable air left, and it's not an accident this time. Someone in the command center just did this on purpose, and I don't know who, because half our own systems are locked out and I can't even tell who's still alive up here." The dark pressed in on all sides, and somewhere above them in the colony's command center, someone human, not Thren, not implanted, simply human, had just made a choice that might end everything. The dark in the mining shafts was absolute, and somewhere in it, 30 seconds of breathable air felt like 30 years. Reyes moved by memory and touch, one hand on the cold rock wall, counting steps toward the command center access shaft, while colonists behind him gasped in air that was already turning thin and stale. Tomas stumbled along beside him, weak but upright, refusing every offer of help with a stubbornness that reminded Reyes painfully of Mara. "Someone in command did this," Reyes said, more to himself than anyone. "Not the null choir. Not implants. A person." "Does it matter who? If we're all dead in an hour?" a colonist behind him asked, voice shaking. "It matters," Reyes said, "because it means we can talk them out of it." They reached the command center 40 minutes later, air burning in their lungs, to find the door manually barricaded from the inside. Reyes pounded on the metal with the flat of his hand. "Open this door, now." A voice answered, muffled and cracking with barely controlled panic. "I can't. If I open it, more people breathe this air and there isn't enough for all of us." Reyes recognized the voice. Elian Cho, a systems technician quiet and unremarkable, the kind of man who'd spent 11 years fixing broken filtration units without ever once raising his voice above a whisper. Elian, Reyes said, forcing calm into his own voice even as his lungs screamed for more oxygen than the thinning air could give him. Open the door. I did the math, Reyes. I did it 100 times. If I seal this section and reroute what's left to the smaller group in here, maybe 40 of us survive until the reserves regenerate from the backup cells. If I open this door, we lose that margin, and everyone dies together instead. I couldn't. His voice broke. I couldn't watch everyone die when I knew a way to save some of us. I couldn't. Keep it closed. And become the man who decided 40 lives were worth more than 300. Silence on the other side of the door. Then, slowly, the sound of the barricade sliding away. Elian Cho stood on the other side, hollow-eyed, shaking, oxygen readouts glowing behind him showing exactly how little time remained. I'm sorry, he whispered. I panicked. I thought I was saving people. You were scared, Reyes said, not unkindly. That's not the same as wrong intentions, but we don't leave anyone behind here. Not ever. That's the only rule that's kept this colony alive this long, and it's the only rule that's going to get us through the next hour. He turned to the console, working fast, rerouting what remained of the oxygen back across every inhabited section equally, watching numbers that told him with brutal clarity that even shared equally, there might not be enough left for everyone regardless of what anyone chose. 40 minutes, maybe less. Cray's voice crackled weakly through the comm, patched in from somewhere above. Reyes, Mara is inbound. She has something. I don't know what, but she said it changes everything, and she needs the entire colony gathered in the primary dome, right now. We don't have air for gathering, Cray. We barely have air for breathing. Trust her, Cray said. Please. After everything, trust her. The shuttle breached Kepler's Hollow's outer hull 12 minutes later. Mara at the controls with a wound on her temple she hadn't had time to notice bleeding and a data core clutched in her free hand, like it was the only solid thing left in the universe. She'd taken it from the warship during the chaos of the boarding assault, slipping past Null Choir agents focused entirely on securing the vessel, guided by Cray's whispered directions through a comm channel he'd risked his life to keep open, the commander's private archive. Everything he'd been about to tell her, preserved in raw, unedited form, along with something even more valuable, the original historical record of first contact, the one the Null Choir had spent decades burying. The shuttle bay doors opened onto chaos, colonists gathering in the dim emergency light of the primary dome, some barely able to stand, all of them united by the same terrible knowledge that their air was running out and there was nowhere left to run. Mara stepped out among them, and for a moment exhaustion nearly took her knees out from under her. Everyone, she called out, her voice raw but carrying across the dome. I know what's coming. I know how little time we have left. But before it runs out, I need you to hear what I found, because it's the reason we're here at all. She held up the data core. 43 years ago, before any of us were born, our people saved the lives of a dying alien crew at the cost of 2 entire colony ships. We gave up everything for strangers, expecting nothing in return. And instead of being remembered for that, the truth was buried, and we were quarantined, slowly starved of resources for over a decade, by people too afraid of what our kindness meant to ever let the truth reach the surface. A murmur rippled through the crowd, disbelief and anger and grief tangled together. They're not afraid of what we can do to them, Mara continued, tears cutting through the grime on her face. They're afraid of what we're willing to do for each other. And I think after everything tonight, after Elian opened that door, after Reyes refused to leave anyone behind, after Thomas fought his own stolen body for 11 straight years just to warn us, I think they might be right to be afraid. Not because we're dangerous, because we refuse to stop caring, even when caring costs us everything. The oxygen alarm chose that exact moment to shriek its final warning, red light washing over 340 exhausted faces, every one of them turning instinctively toward each other instead of away. No one ran. No one scrambled for a smaller, safer group. They simply moved closer together, hands finding hands in the dark, bracing for whatever came next as one single, unbroken colony. Cray stood at the edge of the crowd, watching with something raw and unguarded on his alien face, finally understanding, in his last conscious moments of belief that this might all end in death, exactly what his people had spent 43 years too afraid to admit. The final alarm blared. And then through the dome's transparent ceiling, cutting through the dark like the first light of a dawn none of them had dared to hope for, new ships began to appear. Dozens of them, their markings unmistakably, undeniably different from the lone warship that had haunted their sky for years. The ships kept coming, filling the sky above Kepler's hollow like stars deciding all at once to fall the right way for once. Mara stood frozen beneath the dome, the data core still clutched in her hand, watching dozens of unfamiliar vessels arrange themselves in formation above the colony, while the oxygen alarm screamed its final countdown around her. She didn't know if this was rescue or execution. After 11 years, she'd learned not to assume either. Cray's comm crackled to life beside her, and his voice when it came was shaking with something that sounded dangerously close to hope. Those are Accord Coalition ships, not Null Choir, the real fleet. How? Mara's throat was raw, air burning thin in her lungs. How would they even know to come? Because I sent them everything, Cray said. Every fragment of the commander's archive. Every piece of the historical record you brought back. Broadcast on every emergency frequency the Coalition monitors, the moment your shuttle docked. I didn't know if it would reach anyone in time. I didn't know if anyone would believe it even if it did. His voice cracked. They believed it. Around Mara, colonists who had been bracing for their final breaths together were now looking upward instead. Disbelief slowly, cautiously giving way to something that hadn't existed inside Kepler's hollow in 11 long years. Hope that wasn't a lie. The dome's comm system crackled with an incoming transmission, broadcast wide enough that every soul in the colony could hear it. A new voice, formal and grave, speaking words that would be repeated on 100 worlds within the week. This is Fleet Commander Withies of the Thren Accord Coalition, responding to emergency distress signal and historical evidence broadcast originating from Kepler's hollow. We have confirmed the authenticity of the archive received. Emergency life support convoys are inbound to your position. Estimated arrival 4 minutes. Director Solon, if you are receiving this transmission, please know that the actions taken against your colony over the past decade were never sanctioned by this coalition and will be answered for. The dome exploded into sound. 340 people who had spent an hour bracing for death instead weeping, laughing, collapsing into each other's arms in a wave of relief too large for any single body to hold alone. Mara sank to her knees in the middle of it all, the data core slipping from fingers that finally, after 11 years, allowed themselves to shake. Reyes found her there 10 minutes later, emergency oxygen already flooding back through the colony's systems, courtesy of the first coalition convoy ships to dock at the primary airlock. He knelt beside her, Tomas leaning heavily on his shoulder, both of them breathing air that tasted for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, like it might actually last. It's over, Reyes said, and the words felt strange in his mouth, unfamiliar after 11 years of never once believing he'd get to say them. Not over, Mara said, wiping her face with the back of a shaking hand. Just different. Starting. Thomas laughed, weak and disbelieving, the sound of a man testing whether joy still worked after 11 years of forgetting it existed. I'd take different over what we had 100 times over. Elian Cho appeared at the edge of the group, hollow-eyed but steady now, oxygen levels behind him climbing back toward numbers none of them had seen in years. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Reyes simply reached out and pulled him into the circle without hesitation, and nobody in the group questioned it, because that was the entire point of what they'd just survived together. Cray approached slower, uncertain of his welcome even now, even after everything, but it was Mara who stood first and crossed the distance to meet him. You risked everything, she said. Your career, your life, your entire place among your own people, for us. For the truth, Cray corrected softly. Your species simply happened to be standing inside it. Why? Mara asked. 3 years you watched us. You could have looked away. Most of your people did, for over a decade. Cray considered the question with the same careful precision he brought to everything, then answered honestly. Because I watched a species that should have died 6 years ago, by every calculation my government ran, refused to stop breathing simply because refusing was the only thing left within your control. And then tonight, I watched that same species choose to die together rather than survive apart, when survival apart was mathematically the safer option. I do not fully understand humanity, Director Solon. I am not certain anyone ever will, but I have decided I would very much like to keep trying. 6 weeks later, Kepler's Hollow stood transformed. The quarantine was formally, permanently lifted, the Null Choir faction exposed and fractured under the weight of evidence that had spread across 100 coalition worlds, faster than anyone could contain it. Supply ships arrived weekly now instead of never. New oxygen processors hummed steadily in corridors that had spent 11 years counting down toward silence. Thomas Vell, implant finally, carefully removed by coalition medical teams who treated him with a gentleness 11 years of captivity had almost convinced him didn't exist anymore, stood at the edge of the primary dome and watched a sunrise simulation flicker to life on the ceiling for the first time in over a decade. Reyes found him there, as he often did these days. You could leave, Reyes said. Go anywhere in coalition space now. Nobody would blame you for wanting to be as far from this place as possible. I know, Thomas said. I'm staying anyway. This is the first place I've ever been where people chose me over the math. I'm not in a hurry to leave that behind. Elsewhere in the colony, in what had once been the cramped, failing control room where Mara had watched a gauge count down to 4% and certain death, Mara now stood beside Cry, reviewing the first official coalition report on the Kepler's Hollow incident, a document that would be taught eventually across dozens of worlds as the moment humanity's true history finally came to light. They're calling us something new, Mara said, scrolling through the report with a tired, disbelieving smile. Not the quarantine species, not the contained threat. What are they calling you? Cray asked. Mara turned the screen toward him, and there, in the Coalition's own official language, translated into careful human script, was a single phrase that would follow humanity across the stars from that day forward. The unkillable species. Not because they cannot be destroyed, because they refuse to stop choosing each other, no matter the cost. Mara set the tablet down and walked to the observation window, where Kepler's Hollow's ice-crowned dome glittered under real sunlight for the first time in 11 years. No longer a tomb slowly closing around 340 forgotten people, but a beacon visible now to every ship that passed. She thought of Reyes refusing to leave anyone behind in the dark, of Thomas fighting a stolen body for over a decade just to warn people who didn't even know he was still alive, of Elian terrified and wrong and human enough to open a door anyway, of Cray choosing truth over the safety of his own people, of 340 souls choosing, in their very last minutes of breathable air, to stand together instead of apart. We never needed to be the strongest, Mara said quietly, to no one and everyone at once, her voice carrying out through the dome and somehow further than that, out across the stars themselves. We just needed to remember each other. Behind her, the lights of Kepler's Hollow burned steady and warm against the endless dark, no longer counting down to an ending, counting instead toward everything still to come.